Hello, you're listening to Boots and Heels.
I'm Becca.
And I'm Lizzie.
Join us as we head across the country, busting some farming myths with some familiar faces.
Hello, wherever you're listening from. We're here today in the snowing side of Yorkshire. So your hosts here today, Lizzie and Becca. And we're going to be talking about the really important topic of diversity in the industry. So we've got two fantastic guests with us today. To start, we've got the none other than Wilfred Emmanuel Jones, founder of the Black Farmer Company, to talk about his experiences within agriculture.
We also welcome Ben Theo Andrews, who touches on representation, sexuality, and organisations such as AgRespect and what they're doing to support differences in agriculture and hopefully how we're going to move forward.
This is a really important topic that Becca and I are passionate about, and we want to encourage people from different backgrounds, different genders, different races, different sexualities to get involved with farming, because it's so important to represent different people. So, thank you so much for joining us today, Wilfred. As many of our listeners know, your career has always revolved around food, flavours, farming. So moving from TV to now owning your own farm, what is it really about food that is the root of everything you do?
Well, the root of everything that I do goes back to my childhood. Now, to give you a bit of backstory, I was actually born in Jamaica, and I am of the Windrush generation. And I was born in a place called Clarendon, Frankfield. And if you went there today, you'd see quite a lot of subsistence farmers that worked the land. Now, you all know the history. People like my parents had the opportunity to come to this country, but even though they came from a rural background, they went to where the work was, and that happened to be in the cities. And in my case, that was Birmingham. We were very, very poor, and I'm from a family of 11, and we lived in a two-up-two-down terrace house. And in a way to supplement the family income, my father had an allotment. And this is where my story begins, because I can remember that this allotment really became my oasis away from the misery of living in a place like Small Heath. So I can remember that I made myself a promise at the age of 11. I was 11 years old, and I made myself a promise that one day I would like to own my own farm. Most people will know, and this podcast goes out to the farming community, that farms are handed down through the generations. But if you're an immigrant, there's nothing handed down to you. You start from scratch, and land is very, very expensive. So you don't have the money to buy it. And then if you want to rent land or lease land, that's almost impossible because it's a bit of a closed shop. And so one of the things I'm trying to advocate is that how can we open it up so people who are not from farming backgrounds can get an opportunity to really get into sort of farming.
Yeah.
So that for me is one of the big issues with the whole system at the moment. It's a bit of a closed shop. The only way you could get in is if you happen to make sufficient money so you could buy land. But for anybody else, it's very, very closed, and that needs to change.
Yeah.
And I guess that ties in really well with your concept of flavours without frontiers. And I guess this is something which basically shows that you nor your food, or I guess probably the whole industry, it shouldn't be confined by any prejudices. And I guess the question is, why would you say it's so important that food production and farming as a whole is accessible to everyone? What are we missing if we don't?
We're in an industry that needs to change.
Yeah.
Basis of nature is, we know as farmers that you have to have diversity. If you do not have diversity, if you don't rotate your crops, if you have inbreeding, you're not going to have strong crops or strong animals. So nature tells us that diversity is crucial. So why is it human beings do not abide by that rule and don't understand that the most diversity of thought, diversity of people is going to make us stronger? And what has happened in the past is that a lot of people in the farming industry have been able to be lazy, and laziness has come about because of subsidies. So subsidies has been the thing that has caused a lot of laziness. I have subsidies, okay, for land for doing nothing. Now, I don't really need subsidies, but I get it. Now, I think the fact that subsidies are going to be eventually phased out is a good thing, because what that will do is that it will keep in the industry those people who really want to come into the industry. And also what I'm hoping for is that there are going to be openings in for people like you, Lizzie, for people like me, from people from diverse background, because what we need to understand is this, that for us to exist, we need to get urban Britain on side. You know, if you don't get into the mindset of how urban Britain operates and works, you might as well lay down and die. It's no good just sitting to your old farmer's mate and sort of, you know, whinging on about the bloody town. Is we need them on side, and therefore part of what we have to understand is that we need to understand their mindset, and then learn to understand what is it they want and they need, and how they could then help them.
So how could we encourage that then, Wilfred? How can we encourage you know, diversity in the industry? Does it need to be out there more accessible? Do we need to be talking about it? Should it be farmers, consumers? Where, how?
Well, what we need to do is that the farming industry needs to be sexed up. And the reason I use that word is this, is that when I started off in the catering industry. And because I left school without any qualifications, I'm dyslexic, catering was seen as where all the stupid, thick people go to. It was not seen as an admirable profession. It was the culture of the celebrity chefs that made it into a very sexy profession. Now people will actually want to choose that as a career. Farming has exactly the same problems that catering had back then. And what we need to do is that we need to sex it up, that anybody thinks, wow, I want to be a farmer, because actually farming is a lot more interesting. There's a lot more about it than we actually see. So
I couldn't agree more. Honestly, from somebody who's not from a farming background, it wasn't necessarily ignorance that I didn't understand what was in agriculture or what farming had to offer. It was more of just that we weren't educated, we weren't told about it. It was, you know, it was the low skilled jobs. You know, when actually there is so much, there is innovation, there's creativity, there's engineering, there's science, there is so much like career opportunities that I do feel we need to be encouraging this. And as you say, sex it up.
I really do believe that's what you've got to do. You've got to make it sort of exciting for young people to think, I want to become a farmer because I want to be like Gordon Ramsay, or I want to be like James Martin.
Or Jeremy Clarkson at the minute.
Well, at the moment, so Jeremy Clarkson is a start, but he's still the old brigade. You know, I think what we want is that we need exciting young people who are a bit different. And, you know, Jeremy Clarkson is a man that was able to, you know, go and buy thousands of acres. So it's not a very fair model. And I want to see that it's easy for young people to go and lease land. You know, the thing that that people do not know is that a lot of land out there are owned by big institutions, and the big institutions are just lazy. They just get their land agent to go and actually lease it out to the same people. And those people, those enterprises need to be challenged about actually, what are you doing to get more diversity into farming? I would be saying to the likes of the National Trust, the likes of these universities that own land, Dutchy, all these big institutions that own land, to say a certain percentage, a certain quota of the land that you have available should be actually be available to people from diverse communities. And when we say diversity, people don't need to get worried and think it's just about color. Diversity is people who are new to farming, new entrants. Part of the responsibility should be to these landowners, and it may be there needs to be some tax incentive to say that is part of your responsibility. In order to encourage new people in, you have to allocate a certain portion of your land to these sort of people. That's how you're going to bring about change. And that for me is that's what sort of excites me.
And actually, probably what we're missing by not being as open as we possibly can is skills. It's a new way of thinking. People come in from a different background, or, you know, even if it's because they're from the city or because they're from a business where, you know, things are more kind of maybe profit driven or efficient or whatever. And farming's missing out on this opportunity to change its way of thinking, which actually it can be a very backward and entrenched way. I think, you know, people would forgive me for saying that on here, that some of it's really entrenched and not looking like change in some areas.
It is entrenched, and I think, again, there are certain industries that have got away with not changing because they haven't had the pressure. You know, change comes about by British consumers demanding. You know, if you look at the big thing at the moment about no plastics, that came about by consumers demanding that change. The fact that we now have free range chicken and free range products in our supermarkets, that's been based on the consumer. Now, all I'm trying to say is that for those of us in this industry, we get our act together fast, because, you know, we are suddenly going to start finding pressure coming from British consumers that are going to be demanding more from us, and so they should. And one of the reasons why farmers haven't got their act together is because of the supermarkets. Because the British consumers do not have a relationship with the people who do all the bloody hard work to produce their foods. They just don't have. Basically, it's the supermarkets that have that sort of relationship. And that is what we need to change. I would like to see farmers' faces on every goddamn pack of produce. That when we could get the consumer engaging with the people who are actually producing their foods, that is where we're going to be bringing about change. Because what it's meant is that farmers have not had to learn about consumers, what consumers are like, what they don't like, consumer data. That's all the information that the retailers have. What I'm saying, that's allowed us to get lazy. That's allowed us not to understand what's going out there. If you change that dynamic and say, right, actually, we want farmers now who it's not just about growing the sort of products and then that's where your relationship ends. It's about understanding the consumer, and by understanding the consumer, you can then innovate, bring new things to market. One of the things I talk about is this: if you look at this massive diverse community we have here in the UK, and the millions of pounds worth of imports that come into this country of foods that could be grown in this country, these are things that I'm talking about, that people from India or from the Caribbean would eat and consume. Those things can be produced here, but because farmers haven't got a bloody clue or they're not aware of it, we're importing that stuff. If we then had people from those communities that were able to rent or lease land, they could grow those produce in this country, get employment, and actually bring more diversity. So that's the sort of stuff I think we need to get people to understanding. It is crazy in our country when all we're doing is commodities. If it's going to be easier for them to produce things in Poland and in Russia, where they've got vast swathes of land where you just switch on the bloody machine and it, you know, goes for miles, we shouldn't be competing with that. What we should be doing is that we should be actually specializing. The thing that makes us great is our animal welfare, the way that we produce. Our specialism is what we should be focusing on. And if one thing we need to learn from is the French, you know, how the French have protected their specialities. No one could call sparkling wine champagne unless it's made in a particular region. We need to start thinking and behaving and really seeing our specialism as something as value, rather than just becoming commodity dealers. And part of the farming community, the problem is the traders. You know, that they have a trader's mindset, and that, for me, the moment you have a trader's mindset, you're not really into innovation. You're just interested in making the next buck. That needs to change, and I think it's new blood that is going to bring about that change.
So, talking about new blood, Wilfred, you have actually launched a scholarship aimed at young people from kind of more urban and inner city communities, and it gives them an opportunity, to kind of immerse themselves in rural life, I guess. So tell us a bit about the scholarship and you know, how people could get involved if they're listening from a non-farming community.
Well, it's been a while since I did that. One of the things that I wanted to do in terms of encouraging new people into farming is to give people hands-on experience of what it's like to work and live in rural Britain. And unfortunately, 7 years ago, I had acute myeloid leukemia, and so that sort of knocked the stuffing out of me. So I haven't been able to do hands-on courses, but it is something that I'm still keen to be involved in. And one of the things I would like to see is these agricultural colleges getting their bloody act together and allowing or putting on schemes, putting on programs, putting on courses that are specifically tailored for people from urban. It's not just people from diverse backgrounds, but people from urban Britain to have a chance to actually train, to learn about the professions that are available in rural Britain. I think a lot more could be done with the agricultural colleges. And that's the challenge I would be giving them, is that what are they doing to actually bring about diversity? And again, they're lazy.
Do you think there's a bit of a gap between kind of like or almost the transition from school to a college, for example, that it doesn't necessarily, I mean, I know a lot of people who I know have gone to ag college because they work on a farm already or they live on a farm. Do you think we can push more in the kind of years building up to whether when you're deciding what options you take and what college or university you go to? Is there a gap there as well?
Well, yeah, I mean, again, it's back to the thing I said earlier on, is that inbreeding is not good. And if you've just got the kids who are going to the agricultural colleges, or kids from farming backgrounds and farming communities, you're just actually circulating the same stuff. And if you take me, for example, I'm not from a farming background. I'm from the ghetto in Birmingham. Now, a lot of people scratch their heads and they think, how could this geezer, who I only have 30 acres, you know, as long as I got thousands, I've only got 30 acres. How could a guy that has 30 acres, a little small holding in Launceston or just outside Launceston, create a brand called the Black Farmer and it be a powerful brand? Now, you know, that's because I have the thinking and the mentality of the outsider. And it's outsiders who see opportunities, that they think about doing things differently. And that if you are trapped in the thinking of how things are done, you would never have the audacity to think and to come up with ideas that I have done on very, very little. So I'm a great example of what one could do on very, very little. That's because I'm not trapped by the thinking of the old traditions. And I think that part of what I would be doing, it's about how it's not about really encouraging people from farming communities. It's how do you get people from towns and cities going to agricultural colleges? They're not suddenly going to do it.
Yeah, completely.
You know, what you need to do is probably have a scheme where, you know, every year they go and work on a farm. You've got to have people having experienced it. So by the time they then come to choose their exams, they've actually had some sort of experience of it. Wouldn't you agree, Lizzie?
Honestly, growing up at school, we never learned anything. I think the most I ever learned about being on a farm was what sound animals make. And when it comes to my options in secondary school, agriculture was never a thing. Honestly, hand on heart, I didn't even know ag colleges existed. You know, even if it wasn't just, I wouldn't want it to become an option at school that everybody thinks is for the kids who aren't necessarily academically inclined. I think, you know, agriculture has plenty of options for people who are very academically able, but also for people who are more hands-on. And actually, whether it's just, you know, ag, how do I put it? Whether it's ag businesses that are giving briefs to some of the creative departments, you know, art departments, computer science, whether that be media, or whether it is actually, you know, we had work experience, I think it was in year 10. And nobody ever said, do you want to go and work on a farm? Do you want to go work at, you know, a robotics company? Or do you want to go out and learn about innovations. It was just not a thing. And I think we need to be talking about it. I just don't understand why it isn't. And I think it's just a lack of education.
You see, what I think is happening is this. The world is changing, and I think both of you are in a fascinating period of our history. Because one of the things that we need to all accept is this. It's only, well, a couple of hundred years ago, formal education did not exist. The way that people learned is by apprenticeships or watching how people actually did things, watching things. Now, the reason why education suddenly became very, very important, or the way that we educate people became very important in the sort of 19th, 20th century, it's about actually how then do you get a group of people who could sort of manage. And when people who are academic, it's pretty simple. Academic people are left-brainers. They're able to absorb in a lot of information and then regurgitate that information. Now, the problem that all these left-brainers are going to have is this, that so the people who had very highly evolved left brains talents, you know, they get their degrees, their diplomas and all that sort of stuff, did very, very well. And everything was geared towards going to university, being academic, because that's how you'd get on to be a doctor, to be an accountant, a solicitor, all this, that's all left brain professions. But we now live in an age where you could go on Google and find out more about your medical condition than your consultant knows. That actually, we now have computers that could actually gather information. We've, you know, under farming, we've got bloody robots that could actually do things that normally human beings had to do. So the future belongs to those people who are more right brain, those who are more conceptual, those who think outside the box, the things that machinery, that computers, that artificial intelligence cannot do. And those things will involve touching, feeling, sensing. So the people who have those talents evolved are the ones where the future belongs to. That it's not going to be just looking at a spreadsheet or reading data. It's going to be able to actually use these other senses to actually help us innovate and evolve. And so what I would be saying to anybody who's going through any educational scheme now, that's the sort of skills that I'd be looking at. So being a farmer would be the #1 thing at the top of my list, you know, because anything else, it will be taken over by computers and, you know, artificial intelligence. But when it comes to actually growing things or rearing things, that for me is where the future is.
Interesting. Okay, so you've obviously been awarded an MBE for your contribution to farming. Congratulations. How does it feel really to be recognised for your work with your alignment, you know, with supermarkets and raising money for charities which support the Black community?
Well, look, the most important thing is this. Okay, I don't want any of your listeners to think that all I'm here doing is supporting the Black community. I am not. One of the things I say to everybody, the Black Farmer brand is not an ethnic brand.
Yeah.
And the amount of times I've had to say to people, look, I'm not a bloody ethnic brand. I'm not Levi Roots. Levi Roots is an ethnic brand. It's all about sort of celebrating Jamaican or Caribbean culture. Mm-hmm. The Black Farmer brand is celebrating British farming. That's why the whole logo is me carrying a British flag. The whole thing is about supporting British use and British farmers. It happens that actually I'm very British.
So you've got a new venture hopefully coming up, which is going to be an inclusive space, which, well, obviously celebrates British farming, diversity, well, everything that we've talked about. So what is the plan for this? When do you hope to be building it? And yeah, what's it going to be about?
Okay, so my ultimate dream is to have something that I'm calling the Black Farmer Experience. And this will be a destination where people come from all over the country, where they can say, oh, we must go to the Black Farmer Experience, because there'll be a farm shop where you could buy absolutely wonderful local produce. There'll be restaurants that cook actually local wonderful foods. There'll be conference centers where people could actually come to be inspired. The whole purpose and the whole meaning of the Black Farmer brand is to be inspiring people. There'll be a wedding venue there where people could actually get married. And this is not just people, ordinary marriages. It's about anybody who thinks outside the box, anybody that is different. This is where the home would be for you. And so I'm looking for the right venue, the right partnership. You know, if there's any farmers out there who would be interested in being part of this, I would love to hear from them, because the first thing is finding the right location.
Yeah.
And, you know, because it's going to be a destination, I want it to be a sense of arrival. I want people to feel as though they're coming into something rural.
Okay, so thank you so much for joining us today, Wilfred. We do have one more question, which we ask all of our listeners, and it is just a bit of a fun question. Would you say you're team boots or team heels? So team boots being out in the field, out farming, or team heels as in someone from a non-farming background and maybe working more office-based? Where would you say?
Let's put it this way. I like both.
Ideal. Well, thank you so much, Wilfred.
Say thank you for joining us today, Ben.
Cool.
Our first question today is just to ask you to tell us a bit about your life growing up and growing up on a farm, and how, well, what sort of a unique lifestyle that brings.
Yeah, well, I grew up on the farm we're on now. So born 1981. We've always been a mixed farm, but sort of the enterprises have changed quite a bit throughout the years. My great grandfather moved here in the 30s, but we've been farming sort of in and around the county for, well, I've done some research, go back 300 odd years, probably longer than that. So pretty well ingrained, and with all the benefits and downfalls of being a long-standing farming family, related to most people I meet in Herefordshire. But yeah, it's I think growing up, I think a lot of people don't really appreciate quite what an incredible upbringing it is being on a farm, and I probably took it for granted, and as I grew up, didn't want to distance myself from being a farmer. Really, it's I just felt that I needed to get out of the country and go to the big city and find myself there, because growing up, I knew that I was gay from a pretty early age. If you're straight, about the first sort of time you start fancying girls or whatever and wanting a girlfriend, it was a similar sort of thing, but it was something that you didn't really know about it, just didn't really know it was a thing because nobody talked about it, and it just it was just something that was just put to the back of my mind. I had to be, because Section 28 during the 80s and 90s, where schools weren't allowed to talk about anything other than a nuclear heterosexual relationship, and so the whole concept of being gay was just wasn't there, because there's no one really in the media either, no like TV stars, sports stars. It was always usually quite negative stereotypes when they were portrayed in TV or film. So it grew up just pretending to be a normal in inverted commas farmer's son, until I finished my A-levels, and that's when I came out.
I think it's a really interesting thing with you mentioning kind of the way that your family's been really rooted in agriculture, because sometimes I'd say, well, unfortunately, probably fairly often, coming out as gay doesn't fit in with the idea of the heritage, farming through the generations, and that real being rooted in one area. And it's quite a kind of a stigmatized thing to do. So, being gay and fitting in with farming sometimes just doesn't doesn't actually work, which is obviously a really negative thing, what we're trying to raise a bit of awareness about. But it's a shame we're still at that stage.
And it's, I remember, after I came out and sort of hearing some conversations, and I think in hindsight, some of my family and friends probably could identify people who had, much older farmers who had always been single, or who maybe suffered with mental health problems, and looked back on it and thought, actually, yeah, maybe they were LGBT too. Maybe they, and they just didn't feel that it was the right environment they could come out. And I've been incredibly fortunate, really. I mean, we have had some fallings out. Don't speak to my uncle anymore, but 99% has been very positive, which is not something that everyone else has the benefit of.
I think we're speaking about, coming out and almost having to announce your sexuality. I think both in and out of agriculture, there seems to be this real expectation for, LGBTQ plus community to come out. Do you think we should be working towards a future where really you don't need to do that? It shouldn't need to be announced. It just is.
Yeah, well, I mean, that's the thing. I mean, it's like how you define coming out. I mean, for me, it wasn't just at a singular event. It has been a constant thing for the past, over 20 years. When people ask you, have you got a wife? No, I haven't. I've got a husband. And various questions where they just assume, if in a conversation, don't ever feel the need to just introduce myself. Hi, I'm Ben. I'm a gay farmer. But it's that there is that that just, I guess people just take it for granted, that they're talking to someone like themselves. But it's, and to me it doesn't bother me, that as long as but I'm now in a position where I can correct people. I can say I've got a husband. But if you had asked me this 10 years ago, I wouldn't have felt as comfortable, and I would have replied using gender neutral pronouns so as not to give away the gender of my partner. I would have avoided any sort of conversation that revolved around relationships, purely because I was worried how people were gonna react to that. It would be amazing to get to that point where people don't need to. But I think from not just from a stranger's point of view, meeting people, but from a family point of view, this and we said about the idea of sort of multi-generational farmers and it being passed down through the generations. I think there is this expectation that you will marry the farmer's daughter from the next door farm and have like loads of beautiful grandchildren for your parents, and at some point you do need to break the bombshell that it's probably not going to happen like that. And I think more and more people are coming around to the fact that this is life, and there are a lot more of us out there, LGBT folk out there than people probably realize. Just trying to be visible, be seen, and so that everyone, other people can maybe get a bit of confidence that I didn't have after I came out.
So Ben, you mentioned your husband. What was your experience of finding love like in farming? Obviously, it's quite a well-known thing that farming is a pretty unsociable kind of a job. So then if you tie that into adding in the stigma of being a gay man looking for love as well, how did you find that?
Yeah, I mean, it's like you say, there's not that many folk in the country at the best of times, is there? It's not like a big city, and so it's very early on in the days of like internet dating and stuff, and just really struggling to find anyone around here. And I'd spoken to my dad, and he said, don't feel that you have to be a farmer. You don't have to do it. You can go and do anything else. And so I thought, well, okay, I'll go to London, get out of see what the fuss is about. The big bright lights. And I went down there, worked for a company that did food and drink marketing and PR. That they launched like small startups, like if like farmers are diversifying. Like we had like someone who was making sheep's milk yogurt, crisps, various different foods that they're trying to like break into the big time. So when I went there, because I seem to be the only person, no one else in London really knew anything about where food came from. So yeah, I was only there for 18 months before I was sick of it. But luckily, I managed to pick myself up a partner on the way. That was, we met over 15 years ago now.
Wow, that's amazing.
And managed to. He'd been in London since he was 18, studying medicine. He'd had enough of it. Wanted to move out to the country because he's from East Yorkshire originally, and moved back to Herefordshire, and haven't looked back.
That's so lovely. Such a nice story, and interesting that you kind of wanted to get away from your roots and explore the city and see what it was all about, and then kind of came back.
Still revert back. I think people do find that, don't they? There's a massive tie to agriculture, and as much as you can explore other things for a bit, and as you say, experience the city and the big lights, there's often a draw which brings people back. I know that's the same for me. I've had a few different jobs now, but I've obviously come back to the farm, and you do feel very at home there, and it's a nice feeling to have that you've got something like that to come back to.
And I think it's massively beneficial. You can pick up so many other skills working in other industries, meeting other people, looking at the world a bit differently. Although I wouldn't go back now, I wouldn't change it for the world. I mean, I think I learned a lot in very short 18 months, but yeah, definitely worth it.
Fantastic. So do you sometimes find then that agriculture can stigmatize sexuality more than other industries?
It's tricky because having not really worked in other industries, then probably not the best place to comment on that. But I would, if we're talking about versus the arts, things like that, then yeah, definitely. But I think probably if you're talking the building industry, other sort of fairly male dominated workplaces, then I think there are issues with being LGBT, but then also being just a woman. I know plenty of people in the agriculture industry who really struggle with women who are farmers in their own rights. They're not farmers. They're not farmers' wives, or they are the farmer, and they get sales reps, whatever, coming up saying like, "Can I speak to your husband?" They get letters addressed, "Dear Sir," and so there's I think there are lots of things that are probably done on a subconscious level. I don't think I've felt it personally on a discriminatory level, apart from, like I said, with my uncle's family. But I will say that you've probably seen it on the Facebook accounts. If as soon as any mention of AgRespects on there or Sassy Ferguson, you've got everyone tagging their mates, going like, "Oh, you wouldn't see me dead in that tractor." It's like, "Oh yeah, Massey Ferguson drivers are all queers," and stuff like that. And like for me, I don't care what people say to my face. I'm confident and happy enough where I am, but I still get messages from people on a regular basis on Instagram who are struggling, and these are all ages. I mean, these are people who are, you know, sort of youngish kids of 18, just leaving school, right the way up to people in their 50s and 60s, and it's a shame that people still feel like that and feel that they can't be themselves. And I think a lot of this rather childish name calling, it just doesn't help anyone. It's not even funny. It's like, come on, guys, there's just be a bit more original with your humor. You know, the whole sort of like, oh, you're so gay, some playground taunts was, I don't think were even that funny when we were 10. But it's in terms of discrimination, I think for me, someone who can, you know, put on a shuffle and a pair of chameau wellies or something and, you know, do my best job of looking like a farmer. I think there are people who maybe don't fit the mold of what people assume a farmer should look like, and then they will get treated with suspicion because of it. And I think that happens a lot with new entrants to farming as well. Everyone else in the LGBT community, like trans people, like, yeah, my life is so much easier than anything that they've got to deal with. So yeah, and they need a voice as well. They, you know, they have it, like I said, have much harder job of being accepted. And I'd almost say it's, for me, like, look, I'm in such a privileged position. So, you know, we're tenant farmers here, but generational tenancy. I get on with my parents. I'm in partnership with my parents. I haven't had to come in to agriculture from the outside. I'm not like, you know, I haven't got to worry about getting bullied by fellow colleagues if I was just like, you know, if I was a farm worker. You know, it's given me a lot of privilege, and I guess that's why, you know, I sort of feel quite like there's some sort of duty to try and just talk about it as much as possible, and raise these issues, because I'm, you know, fairly relatable, because I am, like I said, a white middle class male farmer. People probably listen more to what I've got to say than someone who doesn't look as much like them.
And do you think, particularly with stigma surrounding a lot of kind of let's say minority communities, whether that be race or gender or sexuality, do you think the industry can be quite inaccessible? I mean, it's probably hard, as you say, even if you fit all of the, you know, as you say, white middle class male, to sometimes even get into the industry. But does adding, you know, some other kind of, you know, a different sexuality or something add a really different slant on getting into the industry?
I think it does. I think it's really Matt Naylor, who was chair of the Oxford Farming Conference back in 2020, was it? Or was it 2019? I can't even remember now. It's so long ago. He set up a really good fringe event there about diversity, inclusion, and combating polarization. It was really interesting in listening to how all humans are tribal, and we like to have our little groups of people, and we have people that we think are like us around us, and then people from outside, people who don't maybe look or sound, you know, they're not like us. We, you know, they're considered other, and we treat them with suspicion. And it's really interesting that I think that is what happens a lot. I think if you're considered an outsider, and yeah, I think everybody who ever moves to the country from the city will feel the same. There's always the danger of, you know, feeling like the outsider, and people will treat you with suspicion, and you need to win them round into showing them that you have as much, if not more, in common than you have differences. And I think that's the, I think we need to work towards realizing that and working towards finding common ground, rather than this polarization of just cancel culture and arguing. And that's why I stopped using Twitter. It just like, and I found myself getting in arguments, and I hate getting in arguments, and it just, it's one of those things where it just amplifies it. And I think that, yeah, we need to maybe be a bit more open-minded in terms of new people coming into the industry, because we need them. We really need more people coming into the industry. We've got a huge skills gap. There's so many different, I think people assume that agriculture just means farming, but there's so many different roles within the agriculture industry that need filling. We need those bright young minds coming in, and also retaining them. We need to keep people in farming who maybe don't feel welcome here. Keep them in, stop them running away to the city.
Yeah, I think that's such an important point. I mean, I'm not personally from a farming background, but I fell into the industry around 4 years ago now and just fell in love with it. And having that kind of, it was a real eye opener to see what the industry has to offer. You know, there is field-based work, but there's creative jobs, there's engineering, there's innovations. And I just think that's really important to make the industry inclusive.
Definitely.
So you mentioned earlier, Ben, about the Massey Ferguson and AgRespect Pride in Farming tractor competition with Sassy Ferguson.
Yeah.
So, Farmers Weekly did a lot to support that. You know, we did quite a lot of articles and followed the story and helped promote it. What do you think it's like for people to see kind of well-known brands champion diversity?
I think it's hugely important. The Farmers Weekly have been super supportive of AgRespect right from the beginning, and it's very easy to maybe censor coverage of AgRespect so that it doesn't upset certain people. And I know that back when we first did the first Pride March in Brighton, someone got very upset and wrote a letter in, and it was published. And I'm just super glad that Farmers Weekly have stuck with us, because there are people who won't agree with it, and they will support various brands. And if the more people who see these big brands supporting diversity, it not only I think it not only supports the people who maybe are struggling, to think that, these guys have got my back, but it hopefully it makes other people think, maybe I am the wrong side of history, maybe I am a little bit old-fashioned, and we need to sort of keep having that conversation in a rather grown-up way, rather than completely shutting people down. Mm-hmm. But I think one of the important things about big brands supporting pride and LGBT issues and diversity as a whole is the danger of going down the corporate pride route, where they will only do it as long as it benefits them. And you'll get it a lot with people just like let's just chuck a rainbow flag on it and appeal to the gays and get them to spend money on our brand.
There's more to it than that. There is more, isn't there?
Exactly. Yeah, absolutely. And that's, when it's just empty words and they only want to be associated with you for 1 month of the year. And I had a similar conversation with a mate of mine, Flavian, who's a black pig farmer, and said that people just seem to only want to talk to him during Black History Month. And it's it's not, racism or discrimination or anything. It's not only an issue for 1 month of the year. It's something that and the thing is, like, it goes back around to the concept of coming out. I mean, it's not something that nobody's asking for special treatment. Nobody's asking, to be treated any differently. It's about equality, and it's always sort of amusing when anything like that gets about agrespect gets put up, and then the comments on a Facebook post will be full of stop ramming it down our throats and things like that. It's like, well, it's not really. I mean, there's like 100,000 posts, social media posts of like, one farmer proposing to his fiance by spelling out "Will you marry me" in bales in a field, and that's not I don't feel that is pushing the straight agenda down my throat at all. It's just something that is just, people just getting on with their lives. And like I said, agrespect isn't looking to be treated, people aren't looking to be treated any differently, just want to be treated the same, and actually don't want to keep having, I mean, it'd be great that we didn't need to keep having this conversation, because I feel I've had this diversity conversation so many times, but while there are still people who are struggling with it, and still people who think it's wrong, got to keep talking.
The more we do talk about it, the more we can raise awareness. And I think what you mentioned there about the comments on social media, the comments on Facebook, Twitter, whatever it is, I think from something I've really noticed is when seeing these comments, I actually had a message through from a guy in farming who was really upset that Farmers Weekly had posted about Sassy Ferguson, but not because he was angry. He was a gay farmer, and he was concerned about the comments and the impact on mental well-being. And the more we had a chat, actually he ended up messaging the next day and was like, actually, do you know what, I'm really, really, really glad that you're supporting it, and I'm really glad that we're talking about it, and I just hope that we get to a point where we don't have to be deleting comments or worried about what people say. And for me, it was a real turning point to hear that he was had to think about it and go, do you know what, actually we should be doing this.
It is so important, because there's and like, I find myself doing it for quite a few years, where you feel like you have to live sort of like the socially acceptable, so being the socially acceptable gay, so where you don't you never talk about it, and you can stand there you're listening to all your mates talking about various girls they snogged or whatever at the weekend, but they'll never ask you about your relationship. They'll, if you ever wanted to talk to someone about it, they wouldn't want to talk about it. And it is this unless you can be your totally like full self, authentic self, and you're always holding something back, then you're not, you're going, that's when you're going to be having the mental health issues. If you're constantly watching what you're saying, so as not to so as not to like upset people, because and people will say, oh, I can't say puff anymore, I can't, it's political correctness gone mad. It's like, well, we've had to watch what we've said for such a long time, just because if I say my husband instead of my partner, I'm in danger of upsetting someone, and it's so important that people can like bring their full selves into the agriculture industry, because that's when we work best. I mean, if you're, I know people working in, whether that's like big agronomy firms, or where you've got big teams and you're working in offices or whatever, and these things, you come back after the weekend, what did you do at the weekend, and just not being able to join in that conversation can really hold people back in the workplace.
And I think what you was, oh gosh, my voice went there. I think what you were saying as well about, wanting to kind of engage with minorities at certain points, different months, whether it's Pride or whether it's Black History Month, or, you do tend to, I don't know if you've come across this, but quite a lot of people I've noticed tend to say, well, why can't we have a straight day, or why can't we have a day celebrating men, or, when it's International Women's Day, for instance. And I think what a lot of people forget is actually, your white, middle class, straight man has never had to fight for his rights,
I mean, there are still people in this country getting beaten up and occasionally killed just for holding hands with someone of the same sex.
Yeah.
There are so many countries, many of them still in the Commonwealth, where you can still be imprisoned or executed for being LGBT. I know we have it pretty good here, but it is by no means. I mean, it was in my parents' living memory that you could be arrested for being gay after the Second World War, when all the Jewish people were released from the concentration camps. The gay people weren't. They were re-imprisoned by all the allies who freed everyone, because in every country it was still illegal. So these are things to remember, and there's so much stuff that I'm married now, but I'm only recently married because I've only recently been allowed to get married, and then it's for so many important reasons for people to be able to have that next of kin being, because if you have fallen out with your parents through coming out and you want someone to be your next of kin who is not your parents, then until fairly recently that just wasn't an option. So it's we've had to fight really hard to get to where we are, and there's a lot of people who have given a lot more than I have to get us to this point. But it's by no means over. Homophobic hate crimes have increased like an insane amount in recent years, and it's something that we need to keep remembering, and that's why we need to keep having Pride, is because as soon as we forget and we get complacent, then it's quite easy. Things can quite easily start slipping in the other direction, and Pride can be a great, wonderful occasion. Will Penry Evans, one of your columnists, came along to Pride with us with his family. And it's great. It's awesome to have allies there, because I think they're the ones who make the real difference, is when people who have no reason to upset the status quo, who can quite happily go along with their conventional heterosexual family. But if people talk out, if they speak out about it, then that, for me, that is one of the greatest things that someone can do. So yeah, big respect to Will.
I guess as you say, then there's practical considerations, there's kind of mental health considerations, there's career considerations when you're having to, as you say, come out or enter the industry, or if you're already there. So for any of our listeners today who might be struggling with their sexuality in a rural or agricultural community, what would you say to them?
I'd say there's a couple of places you can go. There's the Gay Farmer Helpline, That's a fantastic resource where you can go to, and that they're proper counsellors if you feel you need that level of help. The FCN, Farm Community Network, brilliant organisation. Or just drop us a message on AgRespect, either on the website or Instagram or whatever. And yeah, just because it's, AgRespect, we're not really it's not really a club or a group or anything. It's also fairly nebulous, but we'll meet up at various events. And honestly, it is, when I first went along to Brighton Pride a couple of years ago, and just being around so many other people who have so many shared life experiences, it was the most unique day in my life. So yeah, those are probably the best places to start.
Okay, perfect. I think hopefully that it'll give some people some hope who feel very isolated, that there are organizations out there and there's ways to get through it,
talk about it.
Yeah, exactly, because it'll sometimes seem like the mountain is just too big to climb if you're, as I said, in quite an isolated place, or or your family aren't as accepting. So yeah, it's great to know that there are people out there to help. But our final question, which we do ask all our guests, is: are you team boots or team heels?
I don't know. I'm a big fan of where do trainers come in? Because when I'm not working, I'm a trainer kind of guy.
We'll go. You can be in the middle.
Okay. Awkward. So awkward.
No, that's perfect. Thank you so much for that, Ben. That was brilliant. Lovely to speak to you.
No. Lovely to speak to you too. Yeah.
Rebecca, I genuinely hope that this episode opens up conversations that are still needed to happen.
Yeah, definitely. There's still work to be done. I mean, by the sounds of it, we're definitely going in the right direction. But hopefully, we're the only way is up with this and inclusivity in the industry.
Couldn't agree more. Well, thank you so much to everybody who has listened today. As always, you can find us on social media at Boots and Heels UK. Yeah, please give us a like, any reviews, following us. It really helps us to get the message out there.
We'd love to hear if you have any stories or any experiences of diversity in the industry. Yeah, it would be amazing to hear from you.